Sarah Martinez pulled her old backpack closer as she walked through the busy airport terminal. Her clothes were wrinkled from the long bus ride, and her sneakers had seen better days. She looked tired, like someone who had been traveling for hours without rest. Other passengers in expensive suits and designer clothes barely noticed her as she made her way to the gate. The airport was filled with the usual crowd of business travelers, families going on vacation, and tourists with their cameras ready. Sarah stood out, but not in a good way. Her simple jeans and faded t-shirt made her look like she didn't belong in the first-class section of the airport. People glanced at her with curious looks, wondering if she was lost or in the wrong place. Sarah had been traveling for 3 days straight, visiting the smaller airports that her airline served. She always traveled this way when she wanted to see how her company really worked. She didn't want special treatment or fancy cars picking her up. She wanted to experience what her regular customers experienced every single day. As the owner of one of the country's largest airlines, Sarah could have traveled in private jets or luxury cars. But she believed that the only way to truly understand her business was to live it like her customers did. This meant taking buses, staying in regular hotels, and yes, sometimes looking tired and ordinary. She reached her gate and looked at her boarding pass. First class, seat 2A. The flight back to her home city would give her time to think about everything she had learned during her trip. She had visited 5 different airports, talked to dozens of employees, and watched how passengers were treated. Some things impressed her, others worried her. The gate area was crowded with people waiting to board. Sarah found an empty seat near the window and sat down. She pulled out her phone and started typing notes about her trip. A businessman sitting nearby looked at her with slight disgust, probably wondering how someone dressed like her could afford a first-class ticket. 20 minutes before boarding, Sarah noticed something that bothered her. A family with small children was struggling with their luggage, and none of the airline staff seemed interested in helping them. The parents looked stressed and exhausted, trying to manage crying babies and heavy bags at the same time. This was exactly the kind of thing Sarah was looking for. She made a mental note to talk to the airport manager about training staff to be more helpful to families with young children. Customer service wasn't just about being polite. It was about seeing when people needed help and offering it without being asked. The boarding announcement came over the speakers, starting with first-class passengers. Sarah stood up and joined the short line of well-dressed travelers. She could feel the stares of other passengers, probably wondering how she had managed to get a first-class ticket. Some looked annoyed, as if her presence somehow cheapened their own experience. As she approached the gate, Sarah handed her boarding pass to the young flight attendant. The woman looked at the pass, then at Sarah, then back at the pass again. Her expression changed from professional politeness to confusion and suspicion. "Ma'am, are you sure this is your ticket?" the flight attendant asked, holding the boarding pass like it might be fake. Sarah nodded calmly. "Yes, that's my ticket." The flight attendant called over her supervisor, a stern-looking woman in her 40s. They whispered together while other first-class passengers waited impatiently behind Sarah. The supervisor looked Sarah up and down, taking in her simple clothes and tired appearance. "I'm sorry, but we need to verify this ticket," the supervisor said loudly enough for other passengers to hear. "Please step aside while we check our system." Sarah felt embarrassment wash over her, not for herself but for her company. This was exactly the kind of treatment that drove customers away. She had spent years building an airline that was supposed to treat every passenger with respect, regardless of how they looked or dressed. Other passengers started murmuring among themselves. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed annoyed by the delay. A few pulled out their phones, probably to record what was happening. Sarah realized the situation could quickly become a public relations nightmare for her company. The supervisor returned with a security guard and another airline employee. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. There seems to be an issue with your ticket, and we need to resolve it before you can board." Sarah looked around at the crowd of passengers watching her. She could have ended this immediately by revealing who she was, but she wanted to see how far this would go. This was a teaching moment, both for her employees and for herself. She needed to understand exactly how her airline treated passengers when they thought no one important was watching. Sarah followed the airline employees to a small office near the gate. The security guard walked behind her as if she might try to run away. Other passengers watched through the glass windows, some taking pictures with their phones. She could see the judgment in their eyes, assuming she was trying to sneak into first class with a fake ticket. Inside the office, the supervisor sat behind a desk and gestured for Sarah to sit in the chair across from her. The nameplate on the desk read, Janet Morrison, Gate Supervisor. Sarah made a mental note of the name, though she had no intention of getting anyone in trouble. This was a learning experience, not a punishment. Now then, Janet said, looking at Sarah's boarding pass under a magnifying glass. This ticket appears to be legitimate, but frankly, you don't look like someone who can afford a first-class seat. These tickets cost over $2,000. Do you mind explaining how you obtained this ticket? Sarah almost laughed at the irony. She was being questioned about affording a ticket on her own airline. I purchased it online just like anyone else would, she replied calmly. Janet frowned and turned to her computer. I'm going to need to see some identification and a credit card. We've had problems with people using stolen credit cards to buy expensive tickets. I'm sure you understand our concern. The security guard shifted uncomfortably near the door. He looked young, probably new to the job, and seemed unsure about the whole situation. Sarah could tell he wasn't entirely convinced she was a criminal, but he was following orders. Sarah handed over her driver's license and credit card. Janet examined them carefully, comparing the photo to Sarah's face several times. The name on both cards was Sarah Martinez, which meant nothing to Janet. The airline was large enough that most employees didn't know what the owner looked like, especially someone working at a gate in a smaller airport. Everything seems to be in order, Janet admitted reluctantly, but I still find it hard to believe. People who dress like you usually can't afford first-class tickets. Are you sure you didn't mean to book economy class? The comment stung. Not because Sarah cared about the insult, but because it revealed a deep problem with her company's culture. Her employees were judging passengers based on their appearance, making assumptions about their worth and their right to be there. I'm sure, Sarah said quietly. I specifically wanted first class. Janet made several phone calls trying to find a reason to deny Sarah boarding. She called the credit card company to verify the purchase, checked Sarah's frequent flyer status, and even had someone verify that the ticket hadn't been reported stolen. Every check came back clean, but Janet still seemed unwilling to let Sarah board. Meanwhile, the flight was preparing to leave. Sarah could see through the window that most passengers had already boarded. The gate area was nearly empty except for a few late arrivals running toward the plane. If this continued much longer, she would miss her own flight on her own airline. Look, Janet said finally, everything checks out, but I'm still not comfortable with this. You understand our position, right? We have to be careful about who we let into first class. It's about maintaining a certain standard for our premium passengers. Sarah felt her patience running thin. She had experienced discrimination before in her life, but never from her own company. This was worse than she had imagined. Her employees weren't just failing to provide good customer service. They were actively discriminating against passengers based on their appearance. What exactly are you suggesting? Sarah asked. Well, we do have some seats available in economy class. I could move you there at no extra charge. You'd still get to your destination, and honestly, you'd probably be more comfortable with people more like yourself. The comment was the final straw. Sarah had heard enough to understand that this wasn't just one bad employee, but a systemic problem that needed immediate attention. She stood up slowly, looking directly at Janet. I want to speak to your manager, Sarah said firmly. Janet laughed. I am the manager for this gate. If you don't like our policies, you can write a complaint letter to corporate, though I doubt anyone will take it seriously. The security guard looked increasingly uncomfortable. He had been watching the entire exchange and seemed to realize that something wasn't right. Sarah didn't look like a criminal or a troublemaker. She was calm, polite, and all her documents were legitimate. Ma'am, the guard said quietly to Janet. Maybe we should just let her board. Her ticket is valid and we're holding up the flight. Janet glared at him. I'll decide when and if she boards this aircraft. This is about more than just a ticket. It's about maintaining the integrity of our first-class service. Sarah looked at her watch. The flight was scheduled to leave in 10 minutes, and she was still sitting in this office, being interrogated by her own employees. She thought about all the training programs her company had invested in, all the speeches about treating customers with respect, and all the policies designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation. Clearly, something had gone very wrong between corporate policy and actual practice. This wasn't just a training issue. It was a culture problem that went much deeper than she had realized. The captain of the flight appeared in the office doorway looking frustrated. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and many years of experience. His uniform was crisp and professional, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been flying for decades. "What's the holdup here?" Captain Williams asked, looking at his watch. "We're already 10 minutes behind schedule, and I have passengers asking questions." Janet stood up quickly, clearly nervous about facing the captain. "Sir, we have a situation with this passenger. Her ticket appears to be legitimate, but we have concerns about whether she belongs in first class." Captain Williams looked at Sarah, then at Janet, then back at Sarah. His expression showed confusion and growing irritation. "What exactly are your concerns? Is there something wrong with her documents?" "Well, no, sir," Janet stammered. "Everything checks out technically, but she doesn't look like our typical first-class passenger. We're concerned about the comfort of our other premium customers." The captain's face darkened. He had been flying for this airline for over 20 years, and had never heard such a ridiculous excuse for denying boarding to a passenger. "Are you seriously telling me that you're preventing a paying customer from boarding because of how she looks?" Sarah watched the exchange with interest. At least one of her employees understood what customer service was supposed to mean. Captain Williams seemed genuinely angry about the situation, which gave her some hope that not all of her staff had lost sight of the company's values. "Sir, we have to maintain certain standards," Janet protested. "First-class passengers expect a certain level of exclusivity. If we let just anyone in there, it damages the experience for everyone else." "Anyone?" Captain Williams repeated, his voice rising. "She's a paying customer with a valid ticket. What more do you need? Should we start requiring passengers to pass an appearance test before they can board?" The security guard nodded in agreement with the captain. "Sir, I've been thinking the same thing. All her documents are legitimate, and she's been very polite throughout this whole process. I don't see any reason to deny her boarding." Janet looked around the room, realizing that she was losing support from everyone present. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her position. "I'm the gate supervisor, and I have the authority to deny boarding to any passenger I feel might disrupt the flight experience." "On what grounds?" Captain Williams demanded. "Has she been disruptive? Has she been rude or threatening? Has she violated any airline policies?" "Well, no, but then she's boarding this aircraft right now, or I'm filing a complaint with corporate about discrimination." The captain turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, I apologize on behalf of this airline for the treatment you've received. This is absolutely unacceptable." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the office. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your professionalism." Janet realized she was defeated but wasn't ready to give up completely. "Fine, she can board. But I'm noting in the system that this passenger was flagged for suspicious activity. If there are any problems during the flight, it will be on record." Captain Williams stared at Janet in disbelief. "Suspicious activity? What suspicious activity? Buying a ticket while dressed casually? You're going to put that in her permanent record?" "It's for the safety and security of all passengers," Janet replied stubbornly. Sarah had heard enough. This employee was not just making bad decisions. She was actively harming the airline's reputation and potentially violating discrimination laws. The notation in the computer system could follow her for years, affecting her ability to travel on her own airline. "I want a copy of whatever you put in that system," Sarah said firmly, "and I want the name and contact information of your corporate supervisor." Janet looked surprised by Sarah's sudden assertiveness. "Corporate doesn't usually get involved in gate-level decisions like this." "They will for this one," Sarah replied. "I intend to file a formal complaint about this entire experience. This kind of treatment is unacceptable for any airline, especially one that claims to value all its customers equally." Captain Williams nodded approvingly. "Good for you. This airline has policies against discrimination, and what happened here today violates every one of them." The captain escorted Sarah out of the office and toward the boarding gate. Other employees stopped what they were doing to watch them pass. Word had spread through the airport staff that something unusual was happening, though no one knew exactly what. As they walked, Captain Williams apologized again. "Ma'am, I want you to know that what happened in there doesn't represent the values of this airline. Most of our employees understand that we serve all passengers equally, regardless of their appearance or background." Sarah appreciated his words, but she knew the problem was bigger than one bad employee. If Janet felt comfortable making such blatantly discriminatory decisions, it meant the company culture had serious issues that needed immediate attention. "Have you seen this kind of behavior before?" Sarah asked as they approached the aircraft. Captain Williams hesitated before answering. "Honestly, yes. Not often, but it happens. Some employees seem to think that first-class passengers deserve special treatment that goes beyond good service. They forget that anyone with a valid ticket has the right to be there." This was exactly what Sarah needed to hear. The problem wasn't isolated to one airport or one employee. It was a systematic issue that required a systematic solution. As Sarah boarded the aircraft, she could feel the stares of other first-class passengers. Word had spread about the delay and the commotion at the gate. Some passengers looked curious. Others seemed annoyed that their departure had been delayed because of her. The flight attendant at the door greeted her with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome aboard," she said in a tone that suggested Sarah was anything but welcome. "Your seat is 2A, just up there on the left." Sarah made her way to her seat, passing other first-class passengers who watched her with obvious judgment. She could hear whispered conversations behind her. People wondering how someone dressed like her had managed to get into their exclusive cabin. The seat next to hers was occupied by a well-dressed businessman who looked visibly uncomfortable when she sat down. He immediately moved his expensive briefcase to his other side and turned away from her, making it clear he didn't want any interaction. The flight attendant working the first-class cabin was a woman named Lisa, according to her name tag. She approached Sarah with the same suspicious attitude as the gate supervisor had shown. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass again? I just want to make sure you're in the right seat." Sarah handed over her boarding pass without comment. Lisa examined it carefully, comparing the seat number to the row multiple times. She seemed disappointed when everything matched perfectly. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off?" Lisa asked, but her tone suggested she hoped the answer would be no. "Just water, please," Sarah replied politely. Lisa brought the water in a plastic cup instead of the glass that other first-class passengers received. She set it down without the cocktail napkin that accompanied everyone else's drinks. These small acts of discrimination spoke volumes about the company culture. During the safety demonstration, Sarah noticed that Lisa avoided making eye contact with her section of the cabin. When other passengers had questions about the flight, Lisa answered them cheerfully. When Sarah tried to ask about the arrival time, Lisa gave a short, unfriendly response. The businessman next to her seemed to relax slightly as the flight progressed. Eventually, his curiosity got the better of him and he asked, "So what do you do for work?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I work in the airline industry," she said simply. "Oh, are you a flight attendant for another airline?" he asked, looking at her casual clothes. "Something like that," Sarah replied with a small smile. The man seemed satisfied with her vague answer and returned to his laptop. Sarah spent the rest of the flight observing how the crew treated different passengers. The pattern was clear. Well-dressed passengers received warm, attentive service, while anyone who looked ordinary or lower class was treated with polite indifference at best. When the beverage service began, Lisa offered the businessman a choice of premium drinks and gourmet snacks. When she reached Sarah, she simply said, "Water or soda?" without mentioning any of the other options available to first-class passengers. "What other drinks do you have?" Sarah asked. Lisa sighed as if the question was an inconvenience. "We have the usual stuff. Nothing you'd probably be interested in." The businessman looked uncomfortable with Lisa's obvious rudeness. Even he could see that Sarah was being treated differently from everyone else in the cabin. Sarah ordered a glass of wine, which Lisa brought reluctantly. Again, it came in a plastic cup while other passengers received proper glassware. The snacks that accompanied other passengers' drinks were notably absent from Sarah's service. Halfway through the flight, Sarah excused herself to use the restroom. As she walked through the first-class cabin, she overheard Lisa talking to another flight attendant near the galley. "I don't know how she got that ticket," Lisa was saying quietly. "She obviously doesn't belong here. Probably used someone else's credit card or something. We should have security waiting when we land." The other flight attendant glanced toward Sarah's seat. "Are you sure? Her documents were all legitimate, right?" "Paper can be faked," Lisa replied. "Look at her. Does she look like someone who can afford a $2,000 ticket?" I've been doing this job for 15 years and I can tell when someone doesn't belong. Sarah had heard enough. She returned to her seat, making mental notes about every detail of the conversation. This wasn't just poor customer service. It was defamation. Lisa was spreading false accusations about a paying passenger based on nothing more than her appearance. When they served the meal, the discrimination became even more obvious. Other first-class passengers were offered a choice between 2 gourmet entrees. Sarah was simply handed a pre-selected meal without being asked what she preferred. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely. "Could I see the menu? I'd like to choose my meal." Lisa looked annoyed. "This is what we have available for you. The other options are reserved for our premium passengers." "I am a premium passenger," Sarah pointed out. "I have a first-class ticket." "Well, yes, technically," Lisa said dismissively, "but we have to reserve certain items for our regular first-class customers." The businessman next to Sarah had been listening to the entire exchange. He finally spoke up. "Excuse me, but that doesn't make any sense. She paid for a first-class ticket just like everyone else. Why can't she have the same meal options?" Lisa glared at him for interfering. "Sir, this is an internal matter between the airline and this passenger. I'm sure you understand." "Actually, I don't understand," he replied firmly. "This lady has been treated poorly from the moment she boarded this aircraft, and I think it's disgraceful. If this is how your airline treats paying customers, I'll be taking my business elsewhere." Other passengers began to notice the commotion. Several turned around to see what was happening, and a few began recording with their phones. Sarah realized the situation was about to become very public, which was the last thing her airline needed. The tension in the first-class cabin was becoming impossible to ignore. Other passengers were openly staring at the confrontation, and several had their phones out, clearly recording what was happening. Sarah realized this situation could become a viral social media disaster for her airline within hours of landing. Captain Williams appeared from the cockpit, drawn by the commotion in the cabin. He looked around at the passengers with their phones, then at Lisa, then at Sarah. His expression showed immediate recognition of the problem. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Lisa straightened up, trying to regain control of the situation. "Captain, this passenger is causing a disturbance by demanding special treatment that goes beyond her ticket class." "Special treatment?" The businessman interjected loudly. "She asked for the same meal options that every other first-class passenger received." "How is that special treatment?" Other passengers began murmuring their agreement. A woman across the aisle spoke up. "I've been watching this whole flight, and this lady has been treated terribly. It's embarrassing to watch." Captain Williams looked at Sarah apologetically. "Ma'am, I'm going to personally ensure that you receive the same service as every other passenger in this cabin. This behavior is completely unacceptable." He turned to Lisa with barely controlled anger. "In my office when we land. This kind of discrimination will not be tolerated on my aircraft." Lisa's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. She had expected support from the captain, not a public reprimand in front of the passengers. "Sir, I was just following company policies about maintaining standards in first class. Show me the policy that says passengers should be treated differently based on their appearance," Captain Williams demanded. "Show me where it says that some first-class passengers deserve better service than others." Lisa couldn't answer because no such policy existed. The airline's official policies explicitly prohibited discrimination of any kind. What she had been doing was based on her own prejudices, not company guidelines. An elderly gentleman in the front row spoke up. "Young man," he said to Captain Williams, "I've been flying with this airline for 30 years and I've never seen anything like this. This young woman has been polite and respectful throughout this entire ordeal, while your staff has been absolutely shameful." His comment triggered a wave of agreement from other passengers. People began sharing their observations about how Sarah had been treated differently from everyone else. Several passengers said they would be filing complaints with the airline and posting their videos on social media. Sarah felt a mix of emotions. She was proud that her customers were standing up for fairness and decency, but she was horrified that her own employees had created this situation. The damage to the airline's reputation would be severe, and it was entirely self-inflicted. Captain Williams addressed the entire first-class cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally apologize for what you've witnessed today. This behavior does not represent the values of our airline, and I assure you that appropriate action will be taken." He then pulled Lisa aside for a private conversation near the galley. Sarah couldn't hear what was said, but Lisa's body language showed she was receiving a serious reprimand. When they finished talking, Lisa approached Sarah's seat with a completely different attitude. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for the poor service you've received today," Lisa said quietly. "I was wrong and there's no excuse for my behavior. I'd like to bring you the proper meal service and anything else you need to make the rest of your flight comfortable." Sarah accepted the apology graciously, though she knew it was too little, too late. The damage had been done and videos of the incident were probably already being uploaded to social media platforms. The businessman next to her shook his head in disgust. "I travel every week for business and I've never seen anything like this. What's your name, if you don't mind me asking? I want to mention you specifically when I write my complaint letter." "Sarah Martinez," she replied simply. He pulled out his phone and began typing. "Sarah Martinez mistreated on flight," he muttered as he wrote. "This is going straight to corporate headquarters. They need to know what's happening with their staff." A woman across the aisle leaned over. "Honey, I got the whole thing on video. If you want to sue them, I'll be happy to be a witness. What they did to you was absolutely wrong." Sarah thanked her but didn't mention that she wouldn't be suing her own company. Instead, she would be making changes to ensure this never happened to anyone else. As the plane began its descent, Captain Williams made an unusual announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to address the incident that occurred in our first-class cabin today. The treatment that one of our passengers received was completely unacceptable and does not reflect the values of this airline. We pride ourselves on treating all passengers with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. I personally apologize to everyone who witnessed this incident, and I assure you that we will take immediate action to ensure it never happens again." The announcement was unprecedented. Captains rarely addressed passenger service issues over the intercom, especially not with such strong language. Sarah realized that Captain Williams was probably risking his career by speaking so openly about the airline's failures. As they prepared for landing, Sarah looked around the first-class cabin one more time. Every passenger was looking at her with sympathy and respect. They had seen her handle an impossible situation with grace and dignity, and they clearly admired her for it. What they didn't know was that this experience had given her invaluable insight into her company's problems. She now had a clear understanding of what needed to be fixed and how to fix it. After the plane landed, Sarah waited for all other passengers to disembark before standing up. Several passengers stopped to give her their contact information, offering to serve as witnesses if she decided to take legal action against the airline. Their kindness touched her deeply, even as it reinforced how badly her own employees had failed. Captain Williams waited for her at the aircraft door. "Ma'am, I want to personally escort you to the customer service desk. We're going to make sure this incident is properly documented and that you receive appropriate compensation for the terrible experience you've had." Sarah smiled at his dedication to doing the right thing. "Captain Williams, you've been wonderful throughout this entire situation. Your professionalism and integrity are exactly what this airline should represent." As they walked through the terminal, Sarah noticed Janet, the gate supervisor, waiting near the customer service desk. She looked nervous and had clearly been summoned to face the consequences of her actions. Standing next to her was a man in an expensive suit who appeared to be a senior manager. The manager approached Sarah with an apologetic expression. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Robert Chen, the airport operations manager. I've been briefed on what happened today, and I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received from our staff." Sarah shook his hand politely. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. I appreciate your concern. We take discrimination very seriously," he continued. "Both Janet and Lisa will be facing disciplinary action, and we're prepared to offer you full compensation for your flight, plus additional compensation for the distress you've experienced." Janet stood nearby, clearly listening to every word. She looked angry rather than apologetic, as if she still believed she had done nothing wrong. This attitude confirmed Sarah's suspicion that the problem went deeper than simple training issues. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said carefully, "I appreciate the offer of compensation, but what I really want is assurance that this won't happen to other passengers. How are you going to prevent this kind of discrimination in the future?" Robert Chen looked impressed by her question. Most passengers in her situation would have been focused on getting money or revenge. Instead, she was concerned about systemic change. "We're going to implement additional sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff," he promised. "And we're reviewing our policies to make sure they explicitly prohibit the kind of behavior you experienced today." Sarah nodded, but she knew that training alone wouldn't solve the problem. Cultural change required leadership from the top, and it required consequences for people who violated the company's values. "Mr. Chen, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah asked. He led her to a quiet corner of the terminal, away from Janet and the other employees. Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out her business cards. She handed one to Robert Chen and watched his face change as he read it. "Sarah Martinez, Chief Executive Officer," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. His face went pale as the full implications hit him. "I've been traveling incognito for the past week, visiting our smaller airports to see how our company really operates," Sarah explained quietly. "What happened today was eye-opening, but unfortunately not surprising. I've seen similar attitudes at other locations." Robert Chen looked like he might faint. "Ms. Martinez, I had no idea. If you had known I was the CEO, you would have treated me differently," Sarah finished for him. "But that's exactly the problem. Every passenger deserves the same respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or how much money they have." She could see the panic in his eyes as he realized his career was probably over. But Sarah wasn't interested in destroying people. She wanted to fix the system that had created this problem. "Mr. Chen, I'm not here to fire people or assign blame. I'm here to understand what went wrong and how we can fix it. But I need complete honesty from you. Is this kind of discrimination common in your airport?" Robert Chen struggled with his answer. His job depended on minimizing problems and making everything look good to corporate headquarters. But he was now talking directly to the person who ran the entire company. "Honestly, yes," he admitted finally. "Not constantly, but it happens. Some employees have developed attitudes about who belongs in first class and who doesn't. We've tried to address it through training, but the attitudes persist." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "What do you think is causing these attitudes?" "I think some employees feel like they're protecting the airline's brand by maintaining exclusivity in first class. They see it as quality control rather than discrimination, and frankly, some of them bring personal prejudices to work that we haven't effectively addressed." This was the kind of honest assessment Sarah needed to hear. The problem wasn't malicious intent in most cases. It was misguided loyalty combined with unconscious bias. "Mr. Chen, I want you to set up a meeting with all customer service staff for tomorrow morning. Don't tell them I'm coming, but make sure everyone who interacts with passengers is there." He nodded eagerly, clearly relieved that he wasn't being fired on the spot. Sarah then walked back to where Janet was waiting. The gate supervisor looked defiant, clearly expecting to be reprimanded by another middle manager who would eventually forget about the incident. "Janet," Sarah said calmly, "I want you to know that your behavior today was completely unacceptable. You discriminated against a paying customer based on her appearance, and you made false accusations about her creditworthiness." Janet rolled her eyes. "Look, I was just doing my job. We can't let just anyone into first class, or it ruins the experience for everyone else." Sarah pulled out another business card and handed it to Janet. She watched the woman's face change from defiance to shock, to horror as she read the title. "You discriminated against the owner of the airline," Sarah said quietly. "But more importantly, you discriminated against a human being who deserved your respect and professional service." Janet's hand shook as she held the business card. I didn't know. I mean, you look so ordinary," Sarah finished. "Yes, I do. And that's exactly the point. You shouldn't need to know someone's title or wealth to treat them with basic human decency." The transformation was complete. Sarah had gone from a suspicious passenger to the most powerful person in the company. But the real lesson wasn't about her identity. It was about the fundamental values that should guide every employee interaction. Over the following months, Sarah implemented comprehensive changes throughout the airline. New training programs focused on unconscious bias. Customer service standards were clarified and enforced, and employee evaluations included specific measures of respectful treatment for all passengers. The incident became a turning point for the entire company culture. Employees learned that their CEO wasn't a distant figure in a corporate office, but someone who experienced their service firsthand and held them accountable for their actions. And Sarah never forgot the lesson she learned that day. True leadership means understanding your organization from the ground up, and sometimes that requires experiencing it as your customers do.